I stood in my driveway staring at the empty space where my ice fishing shelter and all my gear used to be, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut while simultaneously stealing my wallet. The morning had started normally enough. I woke up at 5:30 like I always did during the winter season, made my coffee, and walked outside to load up my equipment for a group of 8 tourists from Texas, who had paid me $2,000 for a premium guided ice fishing experience on Lake Mille Lacs. That's when I discovered everything was gone, not just moved, gone, vanished. My custom ice shelter that cost me $4,000, my augers, my underwater cameras, my sonar equipment, my tip-ups, my portable heaters, my safety gear, all the rods and tackle boxes, everything. 12 years of building my business, and someone had just taken it all. I pulled out my phone and started calling the police when my neighbor Frank came running over from across the street. He was still in his bathrobe, which meant this was serious because Frank never left his house before getting fully dressed. "Wade, I tried to stop them," he said, out of breath. "I told them they were making a mistake, but they wouldn't listen to me." "Who wouldn't listen? What happened?" I demanded, my heart racing. "The HOA. That new president, Patricia something. She showed up yesterday evening around 6 with some guys in a truck. They had a notice saying they were confiscating your equipment for violating community storage regulations. I told them you run a business and that's all business property, but she said it didn't matter." My blood went cold. Patricia Vandermeer. She'd been elected HOA president 3 months ago and had immediately started making everyone's life miserable with her interpretation of the neighborhood rules. Last month, she'd fined the Johnsons $300 because their holiday lights stayed up until January 3rd. The month before that, she'd threatened the Martinses with legal action because their teenager's car was parked on the street for more than 48 hours while he was away at college. "Where did they take it?" I asked Frank. "I don't know. Some storage facility, I think." "She left a notice on your door." I ran to my front door and sure enough, there was a formal-looking document taped to it. The HOA had issued me a citation for violating Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines, which prohibited storage of recreational vehicles, boats, trailers, or excessive recreational equipment in visible areas of the property. According to the notice, my property had been temporarily relocated to secure storage pending compliance and payment of associated fees. The fees listed at the bottom made my jaw drop. $500 for the violation, $200 per day for storage, and a $500 retrieval processing fee once I came into compliance. They'd taken my gear yesterday evening, which meant I was already $400 in the hole for storage, and that number would keep climbing. I immediately called the number listed on the notice. An automated voice directed me through a menu system that eventually led to Patricia Vandermeer's personal cell phone. "HOA President Vandermeer speaking," she answered in a crisp, self-satisfied tone. "This is Wade Emerson from 1422 Lakeshore Drive. You took my property last night and I need it back immediately. I have clients expecting a guided tour in 2 hours. Mr. Emerson, your property was confiscated due to violations of community standards. The equipment was creating an eyesore and diminishing property values for the entire neighborhood. That equipment is how I make my living. I'm a licensed ice fishing guide. That's business property, not personal recreational equipment. You can't just take it. According to our community guidelines, the distinction is irrelevant. The equipment was stored visibly on your property in violation of Section 7.3. If you wish to retrieve your items, you must pay the outstanding fines and fees, submit a compliance plan, and have that plan approved by the HOA board. I have paying customers in 2 hours, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm going to lose thousands of dollars. Where is my equipment? The location of the storage facility is confidential for security reasons. Once you've paid your fees and your compliance plan is approved, you'll be provided with retrieval information. The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Are you out of your mind? I need that gear today, right now. Mr. Emerson, your tone is becoming hostile. If you continue, I'll be forced to add additional fines for harassment of HOA officials. I suggest you review the community guidelines you agreed to when you purchased your home. Good day. She hung up. I stood there holding my phone, unable to process what had just happened. This woman had essentially stolen $15,000 worth of my business equipment and was holding it hostage for ransom. I called back immediately, but she didn't answer. I tried 3 more times with the same result. Frank was still standing in my driveway looking concerned. What did she say? She says I can't get my gear back until I pay fines and wait for some board meeting in 3 weeks. I have 8 clients from Texas showing up at 7:30 expecting a professional guided ice fishing experience. Can you rent equipment somewhere? I'd already thought of that. Not on this short notice and not the specialized stuff I use. My clients paid premium prices because I provide premium equipment and expertise. Half of what she took can't be replaced in 3 weeks, let alone 2 hours. I called my clients and had one of the worst conversations of my professional life. Marcus Webb, the guy who'd organized the trip for his company's executive team, was understandably furious. I offered to refund their money immediately plus an additional $500 for their inconvenience, but the damage to my reputation was done. He said he'd leave reviews everywhere he could to warn people about my unreliability. After I hung up, I sat down on my front steps and tried to think. I'd been running Emerson Ice Fishing Adventures for 12 years. I had a perfect 5-star rating across multiple platforms. I grossed about $60,000 during the prime season from December through February, which supplemented my income from my summer fishing guide business. I had bookings scheduled for the next 6 weeks solid, representing over $30,000 in revenue. If I couldn't recover my equipment, I'd lose everything I'd built. My phone rang. It was Jenny Martinez from down the street. Wade, I heard what happened. Patricia put something on the neighborhood Facebook group about it. She's bragging about finally cleaning up the neighborhood. She's bragging. She posted photos of your equipment with a caption about how she's setting a new standard for community excellence. There are already 50 comments. Most people are on your side, but her supporters are saying you should have followed the rules. I got online and found the post. Sure enough, Patricia had written a lengthy statement about her commitment to maintaining property values and enforcing standards that previous leadership had allowed to slide. The photos showed my equipment being loaded into a truck. The comments section was a war zone. Frank Jensen had written, "This is Wade's business property. He's a professional guide with a legitimate licensed business. This is overreach." Patricia had responded, "The rules apply to everyone equally, no exceptions for business or personal use. Visible storage of this nature is prohibited regardless of purpose." Linda Morrison wrote, "About time someone enforced the rules. That equipment was ugly and I'm glad it's gone." Tom Brennan countered, "Linda, your garden gnome collection is ugly, but we don't steal your property." It went on like that for dozens of comments. What struck me was how Patricia responded to every comment challenging her decision with the same robotic insistence on rules and property values, without any acknowledgement that she'd effectively shut down someone's livelihood. I called my lawyer, Robert Chen, who I'd used when setting up my LLC years ago. "Wade, good to hear from you. What's going on?" I explained the situation. He was quiet for a long moment. "That's conversion," he said finally. "Possibly theft. The HOA doesn't have the legal authority to seize and hold property like this, especially business property. Even if you were in violation of HOA rules, which is debatable, their remedy is fines and potential legal action, not self-help repossession. So what do I do? First, file a police report immediately. This is theft, full stop. Second, I'll draft a demand letter to the HOA requiring immediate return of your property. Third, we may need to seek an emergency court order. The problem is timing. Even expedited, we're looking at several days minimum to get before a judge. I don't have several days. I have bookings starting tomorrow. I understand. File the police report first. That creates a record and might scare some sense into them. I'll have the demand letter ready by this afternoon. I drove to the Brainerd Police Department and filed a report with Officer Kevin Walsh. He was a big guy, maybe 45, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his whole life in Minnesota winters. "So let me make sure I understand this," he said, typing notes into his computer. "Your HOA president took your business equipment without permission and is refusing to return it unless you pay fees." That's exactly right. I make my living as an ice fishing guide. Everything I need to operate my business is currently being held by Patricia Vandermeer somewhere, and she won't tell me where or let me have it back. You have documentation proving ownership. I have purchase receipts, insurance documentation, business licenses, everything. It's all clearly my property used for my registered business. Officer Walsh nodded slowly. This is tricky. HOAs operate in a weird gray area legally. They can enforce their rules through fines and liens, but they generally can't just take property. On the other hand, you did agree to their rules when you bought your house. I agreed to reasonable rules about maintaining my property and being a good neighbor. I didn't agree to let them steal my business assets. I hear you. Let me talk to my sergeant. He came back 15 minutes later with another officer, Sergeant Maria Torres. She was maybe 50, with sharp eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. "Mr. Emerson, I reviewed your complaint. We're going to classify this as a civil dispute for now, but I want to have a conversation with Miss Vandermeer. Can you provide her contact information?" I gave them everything I had. Sergeant Torres made the call right there in the station while I waited. "Miss Vandermeer, this is Sergeant Torres with Brainerd PD. I have Wade Emerson here filing a complaint about property you removed from his residence." "Yes, I understand you're the HOA president." "Madam, regardless of HOA rules, you cannot seize and hold someone's property without a court order. The distinction between business and personal property is legally significant. Madam, I'm going to need you to tell me where this equipment is located so we can sort this out." Torres put her hand over the phone. She's refusing to disclose the location, says it's internal HOA business. She went back to the call. "Miss Vandermeer, I'm advising you that this could be considered theft or conversion. You need to return Mr. Emerson's property immediately or you could face criminal charges." "No, that's not how this works. You can't hold someone's property ransom. You need to speak to your attorney before this escalates further. I'm giving you until 5 p.m. today to contact Mr. Emerson with return arrangements. If you don't, we'll pursue this as a criminal matter." She hung up and looked at me. She's in over her head. My guess is she'll talk to a lawyer who will tell her she's committed about 5 different torts and possibly a crime. The threat of criminal charges should motivate her. And if it doesn't, then we move forward with investigating this as theft. The problem is the amount of property involved probably makes this a felony-level offense, which means the county attorney gets involved, and these things take time to process. Your best bet is the civil route with your attorney while we maintain the criminal investigation as leverage. I thanked them and left, feeling slightly better knowing the police took it seriously, but frustrated by how long everything takes in the legal system. My phone showed 3 missed calls from other clients confirming bookings for later in the week. I was going to have to start canceling unless something changed fast. Robert Chen called me at 2 p.m. I sent the demand letter via email and certified mail, very firm language. Return of all property within 24 hours, or we seek emergency injunctive relief and file a lawsuit for conversion, tortious interference with business relations, and various other claims. Also mention the police report. Think it'll work? If she has half a brain or talks to a competent attorney, yes. The law is completely on your side here, but if she's as stubborn as she sounds, we might have to go to court. At 4:30 p.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. Is this Wade Emerson? A man's voice, older, professional sounding. Speaking. My name is Donald Herzog. I'm an attorney representing Patricia Vandermeer and the Pine Valley Homeowners Association. I've been made aware of the situation regarding your equipment. Your client stole my business property. I want it back immediately. Mr. Emerson, I've reviewed the matter and advised my client that the association's actions may have exceeded their authority. However, there is a legitimate underlying violation of community standards that needs to be addressed. I don't care about community standards right now. I care about getting my property back so I can run my business. I understand. Here's what I'm proposing as a resolution. The association will return all of your property by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. You will agree to relocate storage of the equipment to comply with community guidelines within 30 days and pay a reduced fine of $250 for the original violation. All other fees are waived. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Where is my equipment right now? It's at a commercial storage facility off Highway 371. My client will provide you with the location and access information once we have an agreement in writing. I want it back tonight. I have a group scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Mr. Emerson, the facility closes at 6 p.m. and my client doesn't have access until tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. is the earliest we can arrange return. I thought fast. I could probably push my morning group back a few hours. It would be inconvenient but not impossible. The bigger issue was the ongoing fight. I'm not paying any fine. Your client committed theft. I'm the victim here, not the violator. Herzog sighed. Mr. Emerson, I've explained to my client that her actions were legally problematic. However, she's insistent that there was a legitimate violation of the HOA rules. The fine is a face-saving measure. If you refuse, she'll want to fight this in court, which will take months and cost both of you thousands in legal fees. I'll agree to relocate the storage within 30 days. That's it. No fine. And I want a written agreement that the HOA will never interfere with my business operations again as long as my storage is in compliance. Hold on. He came back 5 minutes later. She'll agree to waive the fine if you pay $100 as a processing fee for the storage and handling that occurred. Your client stole my property and now wants me to pay for the privilege. No. Wade, may I be frank with you? Herzog's tone shifted, less formal. I took this call because Patricia is my neighbor and asked for help. I've since learned this is much worse than she represented. She's exposed herself and the HOA to significant liability. I'm trying to get you your property back and end this cleanly. The $100 is nothing to you or me, but it lets her tell herself she maintained some authority. Take the deal. Get your stuff back. Move on. He was right, even though it galled me to give Patricia a single dollar. Fine. $100. Property returned by 10 a.m. tomorrow. 30 days to relocate storage, and a written agreement about business operations. I'll have the agreement drafted and emailed to you within the hour. If your attorney approves and you sign it, my client will meet you at your property at 10 a.m. with all of your equipment. I called Robert Chen and filled him in. He agreed it was a reasonable settlement under the circumstances. By 7 p.m., I had a signed agreement and confirmation that my equipment would be returned the following morning. I spent the evening calling clients and rescheduling. Most were understanding once I explained there'd been an emergency, though I could tell some were annoyed. The Texas group's negative review had already appeared on 2 platforms. I responded professionally, explaining the situation and offering to make it right if they gave me another chance. No response. At 9:45 the next morning, a large truck pulled up in front of my house. Patricia Vandermeer got out along with 2 young guys in work clothes. She was exactly what I'd imagined. Mid-50s, expensively dressed in a way that screamed, "I need you to know I have money," with perfect blonde highlights and an expression like she was perpetually smelling something unpleasant. I walked out to meet them. "Miss Vandermeer, Mr. Emerson, I trust you've reviewed and signed the agreement." "I have. Let's get my equipment unloaded." The 2 workers started pulling gear out of the truck while Patricia stood with her arms crossed, watching. Everything appeared to be there, though I'd need to do a full inventory later. "I want you to understand," Patricia said, "that this neighborhood has standards. The previous HOA board let things slide for years, and property values suffered as a result. I was elected to change that. You understand you could have been arrested, right? What you did was theft. The police told you that." Her face tightened. "I was enforcing legitimate community guidelines. Your equipment was visible from the street and violated our standards. The fact that you use it for business doesn't exempt you from following the rules everyone else has to follow. There are ways to handle violations that don't involve stealing people's property. I didn't steal anything. I temporarily relocated items that were in violation until compliance could be achieved. One of the workers dropped an auger and I heard something crack. I rushed over and picked it up. The handle had broken. "This is damaged," I said, holding it up. Patricia shrugged. "Equipment gets damaged when it's moved. That's not our responsibility." "The hell it's not. You broke my property. Prove it wasn't already broken. Prove it didn't happen during normal use." "You can't." The agreement I'd signed had a clause releasing the HOA from liability for damage. Robert had flagged it, but said it was standard in these types of settlements, and fighting over it would delay getting my property back. Now, I was regretting not pushing harder. I spent the next 20 minutes doing inventory while the workers unloaded. Besides the broken auger, I found one of my underwater cameras was cracked, and 2 rod and reel combinations were missing entirely. "Where's the rest of my equipment?" I demanded. Patricia checked a list on her phone. "Everything on the inventory is here." I had 12 rod and reel setups. "There are only 10 here." The inventory we created listed 10, because you lost 2 of them, or because you never had 12. "Again, Mr. Emerson, prove otherwise." My hands clenched into fists. Frank must have seen my expression from his yard because he came jogging over. "Everything okay, Wade?" "Everything's fine," Patricia said quickly. "We're just completing the return of Mr. Emerson's property per our agreement." "Wade," Frank looked at me, "equipment is damaged and some is missing, but apparently I can't prove it." "I saw them load everything," Frank said. "There were definitely 12 rods. I counted them because I was thinking about how much fishing gear you had. And that auger wasn't broken. Patricia's expression finally showed some concern. "Who are you, Frank Jensen? I live across the street. I watched your people load Wade's equipment, and I'm telling you everything was in good condition, and there were 12 rods. That's your opinion as an untrained observer." "I'll testify to it in court if needed," Frank said flatly. Patricia's face flushed red. She turned to the workers. "Is everything off the truck?" "That's everything we loaded," one of them said. "Then we're done here. Mr. Emerson, you have your property. Per our agreement, you have 30 days to ensure all equipment is stored in compliance with community guidelines. I'll be monitoring your property to ensure compliance." She got in her car and drove off. The workers followed in the truck. Frank helped me carry everything to my backyard while I did a more thorough inventory. The missing rods were worth about $400. The broken auger would cost $300 to replace. The cracked camera was another $200. Add in the $100 payment I'd made, and this little adventure had cost me $1,000 plus the lost revenue from canceled bookings. I called Robert Chen again. "She damaged property and some is missing. The agreement released them from liability, but I have a witness who saw everything being loaded undamaged. The release makes it tough. We could argue it doesn't cover intentional damage or theft, but proving that would be expensive and time-consuming. Your call if you want to pursue it." I thought about it. $1,000 was significant but not life-destroying. The time and stress of going to court would cost me more in the long run. Sometimes you have to swallow your losses and move on. I'll let it go. But I want to file a formal complaint about her with the HOA board. That's your right as a homeowner. I'd be happy to help you draft something. The next few days were consumed with getting back to normal operations. I had to rent an auger for my scheduled tours while I waited for a replacement to arrive. Reviews started coming in from clients I'd rescheduled, and thankfully they were positive, though several mentioned the inconvenience of the timing changes. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board about Patricia's conduct, detailing what had happened and arguing she'd exceeded her authority and exposed the association to legal liability. I gathered supporting documentation, including the police report, the demand letter from my attorney, and a statement from Frank about witnessing the confiscation. The HOA bylaws required the board to hold a hearing on any formal complaint within 30 days. I submitted my complaint and waited. 2 weeks later, I received notice of a special board meeting scheduled to address my complaint. The meeting was at the community center on a Tuesday evening. I arrived early with Robert Chen and Frank, who'd agreed to come as my witness. The board consisted of 5 members, including Patricia as president. The other 4 were Tom Brennan, who I knew casually as a reasonable guy, Linda Morrison, who'd supported Patricia on Facebook, James Keller, who kept to himself mostly, and Susan Wright, a retired teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. About 30 other neighbors showed up, which surprised me. Apparently word had spread about the conflict and people wanted to see how it played out. Patricia called the meeting to order and read the formal complaint I'd submitted. "Mr. Emerson has accused me of exceeding my authority and exposing the association to legal liability through my enforcement of community standards. I'd like to address these accusations directly." She spent 15 minutes defending her actions, claiming she'd followed proper procedures and had the full authority of the HOA board to enforce violations. She characterized my complaint as sour grapes from someone who got caught breaking the rules and didn't want to face consequences. "Miss Vandermeer," Tom Brennan interrupted, "did you have board authorization to confiscate Mr. Emerson's property?" "I have general authorization to enforce violations." That's not what I asked. Did you bring this specific situation to the board before taking action? Patricia hesitated. The bylaws give the president discretionary authority to address immediate violations. Patricia, you took $15,000 worth of his business equipment and held it for ransom. That's not addressing a violation, that's theft. I resent that characterization. I was protecting neighborhood property values. Susan Wright spoke up. I reviewed our bylaws after Mr. Emerson's complaint was filed. Nothing in our governing documents authorizes the seizure of property. We can fine, we can place liens, we can take legal action. We cannot take people's belongings. The equipment was creating a significant visual blight, Linda Morrison chimed in. I support what Patricia did. Someone needed to finally enforce our standards. Linda, he runs a business, Tom said. A legitimate licensed business. We can't just shut down someone's livelihood because you don't like looking at fishing gear. The meeting devolved into arguing between board members while I sat watching. Finally, Robert Chen raised his hand. May I address the board? Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. You are. Robert Chen, Mr. Emerson's attorney. I want to make something very clear to this board. What your president did was illegal, not just a violation of your bylaws, but actual illegal conduct under Minnesota law. She committed conversion, possibly theft, and tortious interference with business relations. The only reason she's not facing criminal charges is because Mr. Emerson was willing to settle for return of his property. But that doesn't erase what happened. And more importantly for all of you, her actions exposed the HOA to massive liability. If Mr. Emerson had chosen to sue, and he would have won, every homeowner in this association would have been on the hook for damages. Your insurance probably wouldn't have covered it because her actions were outside the scope of legitimate HOA functions. Are you threatening us? Linda demanded. No, I'm educating you. HOAs operate under very specific legal constraints. You have authority over certain things, but that authority has limits. Your president exceeded those limits dramatically. James Keller, who hadn't spoken yet, cleared his throat. I've been reviewing our insurance policy since this situation came to light. Mr. Chen is correct. Our insurance specifically excludes coverage for actions outside proper HOA functions. If we'd been sued, we'd have been personally liable. That got everyone's attention. Nothing motivates HOA board members like the threat to their personal finances. So what do you want, Mr. Emerson? Susan asked directly. I want acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. I want reimbursement for damaged and missing property, which totals about $900. I want assurance it won't happen again. And frankly, I think the board should consider whether Miss Vandermeer should continue as president given her poor judgment. Patricia stood up abruptly. I will not sit here and be attacked for doing my job. This board elected me to enforce standards, and that's exactly what I did. If you want weak leadership that lets this neighborhood go to hell, fine, but don't come crying to me when your property values tank. Patricia, sit down, Tom said firmly. Nobody's attacking you. We're addressing legitimate concerns about illegal conduct. I'm not sitting here for this. She grabbed her purse and walked out. The remaining board members looked at each other awkwardly. After a moment, Susan took charge. Well, this is unprecedented. Tom, as vice president, you're now running this meeting. Let's address Mr. Emerson's requests one by one. Over the next hour, the board voted to formally acknowledge that the confiscation of my property was improper and outside HOA authority. They agreed to reimburse me $900 for damaged and missing items. They also voted to adopt new rules requiring board approval before any enforcement action, beyond issuing citations for violations. The question of Patricia's continued leadership was trickier. They couldn't remove her without a vote of the full membership, but they could call for a special election. After much debate, they voted 3-1, Linda dissenting, to send out notice of a recall vote to all homeowners. As the meeting wrapped up, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Apparently, she'd been making lots of people miserable with her aggressive enforcement approach. But I was the first one who'd really fought back. Over the next 3 weeks, the neighborhood was consumed by recall drama. Patricia organized her supporters, maybe a dozen households who genuinely believed in her strict enforcement approach. The rest of the neighborhood was split between people who actively wanted her gone and people who just wanted the whole thing to go away. Patricia made her case through constant emails and Facebook posts, positioning herself as the only leader willing to maintain standards while everyone else wanted to let the neighborhood deteriorate. She pointed to properties with minor violations, taking photos and posting them with commentary about how this was what we'd get with weak leadership. The opposition, led by Tom Brennan and Frank Jensen, focused on Patricia's overreach and the legal risks she'd exposed everyone to. They emphasized that enforcing standards and respecting property rights weren't mutually exclusive. I tried to stay out of the political fight, but Patricia made that impossible. She started posting about my property constantly, taking photos of my backyard where I was now storing equipment in compliance with the guidelines, and complaining that I'd been given special treatment. She filed multiple new violations against me for trivial things like my garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 24 hours after pickup, which was technically against the rules, but something nobody had ever enforced before. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I accumulated 6 of them in 2 weeks. I paid the first 3 to avoid escalation, but when the 4th arrived for my house numbers being insufficiently visible, I'd had enough. The numbers were the same ones that had been there for 12 years, and they were perfectly readable. I called Robert Chen. She's harassing me with frivolous violations. Agreed. Stop paying the fines. Let them accumulate. If she tries to place a lien or take legal action, we'll fight it and counterclaim for harassment. Document everything. The recall vote was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the community center. Every homeowner got 1 vote. Patricia needed more than 50% of votes cast to remain as president. If she got less than that, she was out and the board would elect a new president. The night before the vote, someone vandalized Patricia's yard, spray painting "Resign" across her driveway. I heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine and immediately sent her a text expressing that, while I disagreed with her actions, vandalism was wrong and I hoped they caught whoever did it. She didn't respond, but the next morning she showed up at the community center wearing the vandalism like a badge of honor, telling everyone who'd listened that this was what happened when mobs were allowed to overrule legitimate authority. The vote wasn't close. Patricia received 32 votes out of 123 cast. Tom Brennan was immediately elected as the new president by the board. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days after the recall, I got home from a morning tour to find my truck vandalized. Someone had keyed "business violation" along both sides and slashed all 4 tires. A rock had been thrown through my rear window. The damage was extensive, maybe $3,000. I called the police immediately. Officer Walsh responded and took a report. "Given the context of your HOA dispute, do you think Patricia Vandermeer was involved?" he asked. "I don't know. This isn't her style, but maybe she's escalated. We'll investigate. Do you have any security cameras?" I didn't, which I immediately regretted. Walsh said they'd canvass neighbors to see if anyone had footage, but without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Frank came over while Walsh was still there. "Wade, you need to see this." He showed me his phone. Patricia had posted on Facebook the previous evening around 9 p.m. "Actions have consequences. People who destroy others shouldn't be surprised when it comes back to them." "That sounds like she's threatening you," Walsh said, reading the post. "Or taking credit after the fact," I added. "I'll go talk to her." Walsh came back an hour later. She denied any involvement, says the Facebook post was general commentary about karma, not a threat or admission. She has an alibi, claims she was home with her husband all evening, and he confirms it. Without physical evidence or a witness placing her at the scene, there's not much we can do. I filed an insurance claim for the truck damage. My rates would probably go up, but I needed the vehicle repaired to work. Between the deductible and lost revenue while my truck was in the shop, the vandalism cost me close to $4,000. The new HOA board under Tom's leadership rescinded all the frivolous fines Patricia had issued against me and formally apologized for the harassment. They also voted to amend the storage guidelines to explicitly allow business equipment stored out of public view, which is what I'd been doing anyway. But the vandalism bothered me. If Patricia was behind it, she'd gotten away with it. If she wasn't, then someone else had strong feelings about our dispute. I installed security cameras covering my entire property. Frank did the same. So did several other neighbors who'd been involved in the recall. 3 days later, the cameras caught someone spray painting "Rule Breaker" on my garage door at 2 in the morning. The footage was clear enough to identify the person: Patricia's husband, Gerald Vandermeer. I called Officer Walsh immediately and sent him the footage. By noon, Gerald Vandermeer was arrested and charged with criminal mischief. Walsh also got a warrant for his phone records, which showed he'd been at my property during the time of the truck vandalism. Gerald must have made a deal with prosecutors because he gave up Patricia almost immediately. She'd planned the whole thing. The truck vandalism had been his work at her direction, and when she'd gotten recalled, she'd sent him out again to retaliate. Patricia Vandermeer was arrested the next day and charged with conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and criminal damage to property. Gerald faced similar charges plus the actual vandalism offenses. The neighborhood exploded with gossip. The woman who'd been so focused on property values and community standards had committed actual crimes against a neighbor out of spite. Robert Chen called me with interesting news. "Wade, I've been researching your damages. Between the business revenue you lost from the initial equipment seizure, the property damage from the vandalism, your increased insurance rates, attorney fees, and general hassle, you're looking at substantial damages. You could sue Patricia personally and the HOA as an entity. The HOA has new leadership that's been reasonable. I don't want to punish everyone for Patricia's actions." "What about Patricia personally?" I thought about it. "The woman had tried to destroy my business, cost me thousands of dollars, and when that wasn't enough, she'd vandalized my property. Part of me wanted revenge, but another part was just tired of the whole thing." "What would a lawsuit accomplish?" I asked. "Financial compensation. Maybe $20,000 to $30,000 depending on how damages are calculated. It would take time and she'd probably fight it, but you'd win." "Would it keep her from doing this to someone else?" "Potentially. If she faces significant financial consequences on top of criminal charges, she might learn something, or she might just become more bitter. Hard to say." The criminal case moved forward. Gerald took a plea deal: probation, community service, restitution for damages, and anger management counseling. Patricia fought the charges initially, but eventually took a similar deal. As part of her restitution, She had to pay me $6,000 covering the truck damage and lost business revenue. The check arrived 4 months after the initial equipment confiscation. It came with no note, no apology, just a check from Patricia and Gerald Vandermeer. I deposited it and tried to move on with my life. The ice fishing season was winding down, but I had a full schedule right up until the ice got too thin to be safe. Reviews were back to uniformly positive. New bookings were coming in for the following season. One afternoon in early March, I was guiding a family from Iowa when the father, a lawyer himself, asked about the equipment storage in my backyard. "Your HOA allows you to keep all this gear at home," I explained the whole saga. He was fascinated. "You know, you could have sued them into the ground. What they did was textbook conversion and tortious interference." I thought about it, but honestly, I just wanted my stuff back and to get on with my life. That's probably wise. Sometimes winning isn't worth the cost of fighting. By April, the Patricia situation had faded into neighborhood legend. She and Gerald still lived 3 streets over but kept to themselves. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual issues like road maintenance and snow removal, rather than measuring people's grass or counting their garden gnomes. I ran into Patricia once at the grocery store in late May. We made eye contact across the produce section. She looked away quickly and disappeared down another aisle. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand to know what she'd been thinking or to get some kind of acknowledgement of the damage she'd caused. But mostly, I just felt tired. The summer fishing season started strong. I'd expanded my business to include kayak fishing tours on the smaller lakes around Brainerd, which were popular with tourists. The winter ice fishing tours remained my bread and butter, but the summer work was growing. In June, I got a call from a reporter at the Brainerd Dispatch. She'd heard about the HOA situation and wanted to do a story about the limits of Homeowners Association authority and the rise of HOA overreach nationally. I agreed to an interview. The resulting article, which ran in July, presented my situation alongside several other local cases of HOAs exceeding their authority. Patricia declined to comment for the story, but the article included public records from her criminal case. The article got picked up by a regional Minnesota news site, then by a national property rights organization that used it as an example in their advocacy work. I did a couple of phone interviews with podcasters and bloggers who covered HOA issues. The unexpected publicity actually helped my business. My website traffic increased significantly, and I got booking inquiries from people who specifically mentioned hearing about my story and wanting to support my business. By August, I'd recovered financially from Patricia's actions. The $6,000 restitution payment, combined with the increased business from publicity, put me ahead of where I would have been without the entire incident. Tom Brennan, the new HOA president, reached out in September. "Wade, I wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia and Gerald are selling their house and moving out of state. I thought you'd want to know." "Where are they going?" "Florida," I heard, "starting over somewhere new." I felt a strange mix of relief and something else. Not quite sympathy, but a recognition that she'd lost a lot more than I had. Her reputation was destroyed. She'd faced criminal charges. She'd had to pay restitution. And now she was being run out of the neighborhood she'd claimed to care so much about. "Thanks for letting me know," I told Tom. The moving truck showed up at Patricia's house on a cold October morning. I watched from my living room window as her belongings were loaded up. She stood supervising, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Gerald moved slowly, looking defeated. When the truck finally pulled away, I felt the last bit of tension I'd been carrying release. It was over. Really, truly over. The next ice fishing season started in December, exactly 1 year after Patricia had confiscated my equipment. I stood in my driveway loading gear into my truck, the same routine I'd done hundreds of times before, and appreciated the mundane normalcy of it. Frank walked over with coffee, something that had become a regular ritual. Big day ahead. 6-person group from Chicago. Executives doing a team-building thing. Should be a good time. Any HOA drama I need to know about, he grinned. Tom sent out the monthly newsletter yesterday. Biggest controversy was whether to repair the playground equipment or replace it entirely. We're voting next week. Ah, the important issues. We stood drinking coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the neighborhood wake up. A year ago, I'd been standing in almost this exact spot, discovering my equipment had been stolen and my business threatened. Now, everything was back to normal, or better than normal really. The Chicago clients arrived right on time, enthusiastic and ready for an adventure. I loaded them into my truck and headed for Lake Mill Lacs, ready to show them the best ice fishing experience Minnesota had to offer. As we drove through Brainerd in the early morning light, I thought about everything that had happened. Patricia's overreach had cost me time, money, and stress. But it had also taught me something about standing up for yourself, about the importance of community support, and about how even situations that seem hopeless can work out if you're persistent and have good people in your corner. My phone buzzed with a text from a potential client asking about availability for January. Business was good. The community was stable. The HOA was functional and reasonable. Life had returned to normal, which was exactly what I'd wanted all along. Just me, my business, my gear, and the frozen lakes of Minnesota. No drama, no conflict, no one trying to steal my livelihood because they didn't like looking at fishing equipment. I pulled up to the lake access and started unloading gear with my clients, ready for another day of doing what I loved. The morning sun was rising over the ice, the fish were biting, and everything was exactly as it should be. Sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving, thriving, and moving forward. Patricia was gone. Her legacy was a cautionary tale about power without wisdom. My legacy would be built day by day, tour by tour, satisfied customer by satisfied customer. The Chicago executives turned out to be great clients. We caught plenty of fish, shared stories, and they left promising to recommend me to their friends. As I drove home that evening, my phone showed 3 new booking requests and a 5-star review that had just been posted. Life was good. The nightmare with the HOA was behind me. And tomorrow I'd wake up and do it all again, because that's what you do when you love what you do and you fought hard to protect it. The lights were on at my house when I pulled into the driveway. I'd left them off that morning. For a split second, old anxiety spiked. Then I remembered I'd installed those automatic timers last month. Just lights on a timer, nothing sinister. I unloaded my gear into the backyard, properly stored and completely compliant with HOA guidelines. Not because I was afraid of consequences, but because Tom and the new board had worked with me to create reasonable standards that worked for everyone. Inside, I made dinner and checked my schedule for the week. Fully booked through the end of the month. The business I'd spent 12 years building was stronger than ever. Patricia Vandermeer had tried to destroy it and failed. That night, I slept well for the first time in months. No anxiety about what the HOA might do next. No anger keeping me awake. Just the satisfied exhaustion of a good day's work, and the quiet confidence that comes from surviving something difficult and coming out stronger on the other side. The story could have ended differently. If I'd been less persistent, if I hadn't had good legal help, if the community hadn't supported me, if the police hadn't taken it seriously, Patricia could have won. She could have destroyed my business and gotten away with it, but she didn't, and that made all the difference.